Hi, everybody. um, Broadcasting from the East Coast, Pennsylvania here. Thanks for bearing with me while I was not available to talk. Um, Broadcasting from my parents' basement. Let me know if you can hear me okay or if you cannot, and then see what I can do about it. The seems to internet's not as great as what I had in my house, but hopefully it's okay. Bring this a little bit closer to me. Okay, so can everyone hear me okay? If you can you just somebody put in the chat if you can. Today I wanted to just talk about honey harvesting since it's August, end of August. Gosh, I don't even thanks Michael and Philip. It's the end of August. So if you have any specific questions you want me to address regarding honey harvesting or anything with your bees, let me know. Put it in the chat because this is a smaller chat. This is just for people that have subscribed to my beekeeping class or the membership of the YouTube channel, not just like, someone that subscribes to the channel. I wanted to talk to you guys first because I really appreciate that you've supported my business, and it's a much smaller crowd. So I just put out a video. OnlineLabels.com had contacted me. They saw a video I put out where I mentioned them, and I've been using their labels since I was working at Big Island Bees. They use their labels. And so that's the video I have out. It was actually supposed to go out like months ago. So it didn't have a computer. It was, on its way across the ocean. So everything got delayed a little bit. The move has been very painful. It's just been a lot. We had some health problems with my son come up. Literally, I believe it was 2 days before the first showing of the house. And the first person that came to look at the house offered us our asking price. And so fortunately, we just were like, okay, let's take it. And so we didn't have to do open houses and we didn't do a bunch of showings or anything. And but it was a lot to deal with that stuff and medication and not being sure when we can get onto a plane. And since you don't really get your money back if you book a ticket and can't use it, we had to book everything at the very last minute, which made everything very expensive. We have already put in our first offer on a house and it was rejected. So that's how buying in this market goes, I have been told. So honey harvesting. I have absolutely no honey. It's very weird. I almost bought some honey. We all got COVID after we arrived in Philadelphia. I believe my daughter caught it on the plane. Because 3 days later she was sick, and then 2 days later my son was sick, and then a couple days later I was sick, and then a couple days after that my husband was sick. I almost bought some honey, but my mom had just enough of my honey left over that we made it through all of our sore throats on my Hawaiian honey. So the next video I am going to put out is about harvesting comb honey. If you have anything specific to comb honey you want to ask, let me know. But that is, I'm not sure if it's going to be like a 3-part series or just one really long video, because there's definitely parts to comb honey. And I have had a couple people contact me because they've seen that I do foundation with beekeeping and I do comb honey, and they wanted to try it. And then their beehive was just a big mess with comb across frames all over the place. So I just want to very much clarify, if you want to not use foundation in your hives or you want to do comb honey, It is really important that your beehive be perfectly level. Once the hive is at an angle, things can happen. And the other thing is that I never put a totally empty box with no foundation or no drawn out comb on a beehive. I will do a couple of empty frames with no foundation, and then I'll put a frame with drawn out comb. Maybe it's from last year, or maybe it's from another beehive. It might be empty, it might have honey in it. Um, but it's and then I'll have a couple more frames that are empty with no foundation, and then another frame, with something drawn out. The whole frame might not be drawn out, but at least it's got a bit of honeycomb drawn out somewhere in the frame, and that's important because it's what I've seen is that bees they follow a like this pattern, this like line. And once one frame is off, the next frame and then the next frame and the next frame, all of the comb just starts to go in that same direction, but just a little bit more at an angle and a little bit more at an angle. So you really need to stop it and have frames that go in the direction you want them to go in. And then they will take that and they will go in that direction for the next couple frames. If you let them decide what direction to go in, they almost will never go in a straight line. It's not really their the way that they seem to prefer to like to do things. Okay, so I Pamela says that I just got a swarm, but I believe I did not get the queen. If I buy a queen, is it too late to get those bees built up before winter? I live in upstate New York. Um, uh, Most likely the odds are not definitely in your favor. Um, if you buy a queen and introduce it to this swarm, there's a it's I mean, there's a good chance that like, how long have you had this swarm? Because not a lot of swarms like will stay if you don't have the queen. So if you don't have the queen, and I guess if you like took them miles away so they can't go back to their queen, but usually they just go back to wherever she was, or if she's dead, or you took them miles away, what you really want is not only for them to have a queen, but if you had another hive and you could put a frame of open brood into that hive, now that would be ideal. But if you don't have other hives to take resources from, and you can't pull food from other hives or drawn out comb, I would not get a queen. I mean, it's also really hard to buy a queen right now. If you're gonna have to buy a queen from Hawaii and have her shipped to you in New York because no one in your area is selling queens anymore, then that is a sign that it's too late. Um, if no one locally is breeding queens anymore, it's probably too late in your area, no matter where you are. But right now, I mean, we were just hiking and I was seeing the bees in the goldenrod, and the goldenrod is the late summer food source. It is like the end, the end. So I wouldn't really, I wouldn't really try. Most likely you're signing a death sentence for that queen, especially if you're having to ship her in from somewhere far away. Um, because I mean, it's going to be a couple days before she's released from her cage, and then it's going to be a couple days before she starts laying, and then it'll probably be another few days before she's really like laying normal, and then it's going to be 28 days before that first egg hatches to an adult worker bee, and then those worker bees are nurse bees, and then they're going to be secreting beeswax and drawing out comb, and that is just like uh, in that time frame, all of those bees from that swarm are going to be dying daily. So unless you have other hives that you can support this hive with resources from, I wouldn't introduce a queen. If you can buy it locally, then that's good, but it's still a long shot that it would they would have enough resources to draw out comb and bring in enough honey. And then this is also like the time that you would want your queen laying for the winter bees. So it's those winter bees are different than the worker bees in the hive right now. I believe like their fat deposits are different, and so it's I don't know, expecting a brand new queen to be laying eggs that would be turning into winter bees. I'm not exactly sure what determines that these winter bees are different, but yeah, I wouldn't really bet on that the hive would survive. Um, you can give it a shot, but that's really my best guess at what would happen. I've never tried it personally. Um, she said Pamela says she could add frames from another hive, but then I think there would be time for the queen to meet and return, especially with all our dragonflies this time of year. Um, well, if you can buy a queen locally and you can take frames from other hives, then I mean they stand a chance. You can overwinter nukes. I would keep it in a nuke box over winter most likely. But if you're feeding them sugar, syrup, and upstate New York, I'm not quite sure when it starts to get cold out, but it was 90 degrees out today. So, but it was in the 70s. Where my husband's from in New Hampshire, it gets pretty cold out by Halloween. So if you have just, about 4 weeks for the bees to be building, it's a little iffy. You can definitely give it a shot and see what happens. It's possible. Um, it's possible to overwinter a nuke. And especially if you have other hives that you can get resources from, they might survive. You never know. I would definitely go with a local queen and not like have one shipped to you or anything like that because that is gonna stress out the queen even more, and you really want her to be like ready to go. And also, I really recommend using a push cage, which is instead of putting her in the cage that she comes in, you make a cage out of hardware cloth and it just Google push cage, like PUSH cage, and it's very easy to make. You just cut out the hardware cloth and staple it together. You put the queen in there, and then she can walk around and she can start laying in those little cells. And then you can release her sooner. Then you could check on her in a day or two. And if the bees appear to be nice to her, release her then. Because every day matters this time of year. It's down to the wire. So, if your queen is really strong, then she might be able to make it. But if she's like a meh queen, then the hive might not. So, does anyone have any questions about harvesting honey or what's going on with their bees this time of year? I have been getting a lot of questions from people about that thermal heat treatment that I mentioned in the beekeeping course, and that company has definitely gone out of business. Some people are finding them used online. It's an expensive product to purchase used, so there are other companies making them. One of my students said he bought one and tried it out and it melted the comb inside. So um, I would really hold off on trying to use that as mite treatments, but it is really important to treat for mites after you take out any honey that you want to consume and so that the winter bees are healthy. It's getting a little late for that, but if you haven't yet, I recommend doing it. And then there's going to be a lot of robbing going on because there's not a lot of food out, so you're going to have your mite levels go back up really fast, and then you're going to want to treat again before you close the hive up for winter. And at that time of year, it's oxalic acid is with the vaporizer is really the number one way to go because there's no brood present, and so it's just one treatment that's necessary. But it's really important to um, do those 2 treatments even though they're close together because you really want those winter bees to be healthy, and you haven't treated probably all summer long because the bees are busy gathering in food and stuff, so you don't want to mess up the honey that's in the hive, and you want those winter bees to be healthy because 'cause they're gonna take the hive through the winter, but then there's just gonna be a huge influx of mites from all the robbing going on, and you're gonna have to treat again before you close it up for winter, because then it's gonna be a really long time until you treat it comes springtime. So even though those treatments are really close together, they're both incredibly important, and I highly recommend doing both of them unless you've done many mite tests, like every single month, and you have a hive that just has a mite count of 0 or 1 every single month. Other than that, you should do those 2, late summer and fall treatments. Um, so how much honey you should be leaving in your hives and how much honey you can harvest is really, um oh, I have a see, there's a question from Michael. Hi, Larissa. First year for me. I'm enjoying it very much. It took note of your comments for the need for several hives to get girls through winter. I've only one hive. So I'm thinking, oh, it was cut off after that. Yeah, I mean, ideally, the more hives you go into winter with, the greater the chance I should not harvest and let the feed off the current honey. Well, most likely that is the best route because it depends on where you live, but like for a lot of the United States in general, people say 35 pounds is sufficient. If you're in the more northern states with longer winters, like Massachusetts and New Hampshire and north of that, they're looking at probably closer to 50 pounds of honey. And this isn't the weight of the box. The box weighs something and the frames weigh something. And depending on what kind of equipment you're using, some people have wooden stuff, plastic, flow frames are each frame is about 2 pounds each, whereas a wooden frame is a couple of ounces. So you need to take into consideration how much your equipment weighs when figuring out how much honey is actually in your hive, and whether you're using a deep, a medium, or a shallow frame that's full of honey. Um, but you want to have at least 35 pounds if you have, a reasonable, like, few months of cold. And then you have your backup of the sugar or candy, dry white sugar or candy on top, but that's not the ideal food for the bees. They should really be consuming honey. And the bees form a cluster when it gets cold out, but you don't necessarily know where this cluster is going to form, whether it's going to be right in the middle of the box or if it's going to be a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. And then they start to move up. So there's going to be honey and hive that they probably miss. It really depends on, like, was it so cold out that the bees couldn't leave the cluster? And so then the cluster just, was consuming the honey right where they were and it was slowly moving? Or did it warm up enough times that the bees could move throughout the hive in search of food? So you really want like an excess of food of what you think they would need, plus the backup storage at the very top for them. The more you can leave them, the better. And yeah, then come springtime, you can see if there's anything left, and then you can harvest that. Um, uh, so if you're in the Bay Area of California, I mean, that's not, like terrible winter. But it really depends. Like, do you have times a year when you would be able to open the hive? Like, is it warm enough out that it's over 65 degrees Fahrenheit in the daytime that you could throw a frame of honey in? Like, when I was in Hawaii, I had a freezer, a chest freezer that I used and kept my honey in. And that was backup honey. I didn't want too much honey on the hives because it's still warm enough out that small hive beetles and stuff can eat that excess, but there's not a lot of food, so the population gets really small and they're not guarding. all of that excess food. But then they're going to need that food in a couple of months. So I put it in the freezer and I would feed it to the bees as needed. It really varied year to year how much they would need. And that was like really the best route because it was warm enough out that I could always open the hive and feed them. Um, but if it's cold enough out that small hive beetles aren't going to be running through the hive and the bees are going to be clustered up, then I would leave them as much honey as you can. Um, One person says the longer you leave your honey before harvesting it, does that make the honey crystallize faster? I don't believe so. Freezing honey definitely slows down the crystallization process. Putting in the refrigerator speeds it up because that's just like the temperature that encourages crystallization. The farm I worked for had honey that was like a creamy consistency. It crystallized pretty fast, and they kept it in a refrigerated room to encourage the crystallization to happen even faster. When it happens faster, it's more of like this grainy, spreadable consistency than those big hard crystals. Um, if you have it in a jar with pieces of comb and things in it, I've read that that can encourage the crystallization to happen faster. Those pieces inside is what I had read. I don't even remember who wrote this, so I don't even know. It's a reputable source, but they had said that it was like the pieces of wax and pollen that encouraged the crystallization to happen faster. And if you were to heavily filter your honey and take all that stuff out, your honey wouldn't crystallize as fast. That's only those are the only things that I know of that can encourage crystallization to happen faster or deter it. Elaine says, if I don't have a winter, Southern Hemisphere tropical, when would the honey flow be? I harvested last October, just before wet season. That really just depends on what's flowering around you.
Oh, don't touch my shoulder.
Um, yeah, on the Big Island, there was Christmas berry.
Oh, Pete, don't touch my shoulder.
Okay. Christmas berry was like August, and so that was the last bloom until the macadamia nuts. I will in January, February, and then the silver oak in February. But if I was on the other side of the island, then there would be a ton of MacNut farms, and I would have a huge bloom come late January and February. I was near just like a few avocado MacNut trees, so it was just like a tiny little bit of honey that came in. That was a great food source for the bees right before the silver oak started, which was a much bigger food source. So it really just depends on what you have. If you have Christmas berry, then that's a Brazilian pepper tree. It's another name for it that has two blooms. In Hawaii, it would be one was in the spring and one was in the late summer. And that was the biggest food source for bees on the island. But sometimes farms can provide a good food source too. Avocados and coffee and the macadamia nuts were were pretty good food sources as well. Joe says I had a hive swarm and promptly caught it in my swarm trap. Well, that's good. Not sure if original hive has queen, but I was thinking now is the time to take the honey super off and harvest. Um, yeah, that is. So if your hive swarmed, then population is considerably less, and that would be a good time to harvest. If you're in an area that has small hive beetles, then it's like very important to take that excess honey off and any drawn out comb that's empty. Before hives swarm, it's really common for them to fill the brood chamber up with pollen. So if you're seeing a lot of frames full of pollen, then you would want to take that off too. Say hi. um, If you're not concerned about small hive beetles, then you really just want to, consider how much honey they're going to need for wintertime. Yeah, she's definitely a mini beekeeper, I suppose. She likes to play with bugs. The Elaine says avos are flowering right now. Um, I think I think the bees do go to the avocado trees. I'm pretty sure they might be a little small for the bees. I know the mango flowers are really small, but I'm pretty sure the bees do go to the avocados. It really just depends on how many avocado trees there are. I mean, they'll go to trees, but it takes a million flowers to make a pound of honey. So you need like a lot of flowers. Um, okay. So any other questions people have, let me know in the comments. I was going to talk about the different ways that you can harvest honey, but just to finish up what I was talking about earlier, when you're considering how much honey you should take from the hive, it's always best to give a little bit more than what you think. It's always great to take a local, like, in-person beekeeping class or join a local club and ask around what other people do. You really have to keep in mind that it's just going to vary winter to winter. So you never really know what kind of winter you're going to get. A lot of the United States, general rule of thumb is to leave 35 pounds of honey, minus the equipment. If you're in the colder states, then 50 pounds is more ideal. You can always leave more and just pull it off the hive in the springtime. Um, but if you want to harvest comb honey, that is something that you're going to want to do early in the year so that it's during a time of year when there's a big bloom going on and there's like the bees are in that wax building mode. Otherwise, it's really hard to get them to just start drawing out comb if there's not a lot of honey coming in. If you're just harvesting like a frame or two, I really recommend just doing that crush and strain method. It's pretty easy. I have a video on YouTube about it and in the beekeeping class. You really just need a strainer, like a basket that you can put over a 5-gallon bucket and just squish everything, squish the comb, scrape it off the foundation, whatever you have, and then put it over the basket and get a little bit of honey from that. I know it's like tempting to want to harvest a bunch of honey your first couple of years, but it's a lot cheaper to just go buy some honey and then have your bees survive winter than to harvest too much honey and have to go buy more bees come the next year. I did get an email from somebody that is making this one product, which is interesting. Um, It is, let me see if I can look up the name of it. It is like a thermal treat, like this thermal heater you put in the beehive, and it keeps the beehive warm all winter long. Or maybe not all winter long, but I'm sure you shut it off when it's not that cold out, but you turn it on when it is really cold out. For those of you that are looking for are concerned about your hives getting too cold over winter time, um, they asked if they could send me one and I could try it out, but I told them I don't have any bees. So they're gonna have to wait a year. And fingers crossed we'll have a property next year that we can put bees on. If you would like the information for that, after we're done the chat, I will put it in the little in either the description of this video or in one of the comments down below so everyone can see that. I haven't tried it out though, so I can't vouch for how well it works or how much electricity it uses. Um, Axel says, should we not assume that a swarm has a queen with it? Do bees swarm without the queen? I thought they do not. Yeah, it's very rare for the swarm to leave without the queen. I mean, I guess it's possible that the swarm took off and something happened to the queen when she was about to leave the hive, or something happened to her while they were flying around. It's more so not that something happened to the queen or that the swarm took off and the queen didn't go with them, but that um, when you caught the swarm, the queen wasn't in there with them, or she flew away, or fell to the ground, or got squished, or something. It's that's more so like what happens with the queen. I've caught like maybe about 10 swarms, and I've always seen the queen in there with it. But you can never really say that never things never happen in beekeeping, because it's the only thing you can really count on is that it's never going to be the same every single time you do it. Um, D Senko says, "What do you use to strain your honey, and do you strain it more than once?" Watched one of your videos where you said you used cheesecloth, I think, but said it made a big yeah. I the first time I harvested honey, I used cheesecloth. That was a big mistake. That was awful. I don't know where I read to do that, but it was a bad idea. I use cheesecloth when straining my wax, when cleaning that. um, I do not. Okay. I do not strain my honey as well as most beekeepers. I am not very particular about it. And that's mostly because most of my honey goes into a jar that has a piece of comb in it. So there's already like little flakes of beeswax floating around in the jar. So it seems pointless to strain my honey. What I do put is it's like a bucket strainer. It's round and it fits right on top of a 5-gallon bucket. The holes in the strainer are actually fairly large. It did come with a secondary strainer inside it where the holes were smaller, but it just takes a lot longer when you put the second strainer in. So I very rarely use it. I do not know. Some people know like the size mesh. The farm I worked for, they used a paint strainer, which strains it, takes out like everything. Well, not everything, but like all of those little bee parts and pieces of wax. Uh, I don't really go to that extent. I've heard of people saying that they use um stockings. Seems very I don't really like using things that aren't food grade for honey. Harvesting it, because stockings, I mean, they're not clean, it's not sanitized. So if you wash it, then like, were you washing it in your sink with dish soap? I don't um it just seems very, very odd and confusing. I don't really know how to clean it very well. One of these days, one of these kids will help me with my beehives. Um, so yeah, I don't really pay too much attention. I got that strainer off of Amazon. It was like $20. And it was really just because I couldn't find anything in the stores around here. The But if you want it to be a little bit better strained, then you can always use a paint strainer on top of that. And then I did have that extractor, which I made a video with. That thing worked really great. It spun my frames with no foundation. The comb didn't even touch the frame, and a good portion of it, and it just had that little dial so that you could spin it very slowly at first and then speed it up, and that worked out perfectly. I could spin all of my frames without foundation, and none of the frames broke, and none of the comb broke. I did do it inside an air conditioned house, and I'm sure that helps. The warmer the comb is, the softer it is. But that 4-frame extractor worked really well. But it's just I mean, I sold that one. I shipped it to somebody in Maui. I wasn't going to bring that with me. They're pretty cheap, but they also dent easily. Most, like a lot of extractors, dent easily. So if you don't have like a good space for it, like with us, we shipped everything over to Pennsylvania in a pod. So it would have most likely gotten dented and destroyed and taken up way too much space. Yes, I said paint strainer. That's what they used. I'm not sure where they got these from. I don't know if they washed them. I don't really know, like, if it was called a paint strainer, but they bought it from a food supply place, but that's just what they always said it they used was a paint strainer. I don't like using things that aren't food grade for food production. It seems like a bad idea. And if I don't want to do it for myself, I don't really want to do it for sale for other people either. Um, but if you just have a couple of frames, the crush and strain method is really easy. Even if you already just have a strainer and you just squish it in like a big flat bottom Tupperware container with a fork, and then just pour it over any strainer. Uh, the one I had fit over a 5-gallon bucket, but it also fit over a large pot, Dutch oven, whatever you want to call it. And you can use that as well. The pots are really hard to pour out of. You end up getting honey dripping all over the place. So um, I got mine on Amazon. It was just a 5-gallon bucket that had a gate. So it was like a hole that's about 2 inches big. Maybe that's 3 inches. And it had a gate that you could just open and close. That one was pretty cheap. I think it was only like $20 or something. Since then, they seem to have gone up in price. Uh, so you can also just buy the gate for like $12, and then you can get a 5-gallon food grade bucket. They also sell them. Last time I was at Lowe's, I had seen them there for $10 or $20, and you just have to drill the hole into the bucket. So it's really whether or not you have a drill bit to be able to drill that size hole into your bucket. Um, D. Senko says, when we spun our frames, we have a 2-frame manual spinner. The comb comes off the frame. How do you stop that from happening? I'll try a nut milk bag. It's food safe. There you go. That's, yeah, if you really want like all those little pieces filtered out, it can supposedly also slow down the crystallization process when you don't have those little bits in there. I just didn't have any problems. That extractor I used, I just started it at the slowest setting, so it's harder when you have a manual spinner because you're just gonna spin it at whatever speed you start spinning it at when. So it can definitely vary a whole lot more. Um, but my guess is that you're just spinning it a little bit too fast. Either that or it's too warm out when you're spinning it. But I just started it on like a 1 or a 2, and then sped it up a little bit faster. Sorry, my son wants to know why he needs some assistance on the iPad. But definitely make sure it's like cooler out. Don't do it when it's too warm out. Donald says, I've had my hive since spring and haven't seen the queen, but there's always eggs, larvae, and pupa during inspections. Any advice on how to spot her? No paint marking on my queen. Um, well, there are the two main tricks that I tell everybody, which is three, I suppose, four. One, don't use a lot of smoke. If you especially are having trouble spotting her, don't use smoke when you're first opening up the hive or pulling frames out. Only use smoke if you really need to, because that can be just like this. kind of like this alarm for her, and she's just going to start hiding before you even pull the frame out. The second one is to um, uh, the few times that I have not been able to find a queen, and I was like opening a beehive and doing a tour twice a day, 5 days a week, where I had to find a queen in front of a group of 15 people out in the hot sun while also doing a whole spiel about the beehive and how it all works and all that stuff. And it was very rare that I didn't find the queen. I want to say once or twice was it for like a couple of years that I did that. And the few times that I've had trouble finding a queen in a hive, the queen was black or like almost all black and just the tiniest little bit of like brown stripes on her at the very bottom. And so if the comb in your hive is a little bit darker, or you're just looking for that stereotypical yellow caramel colored queen, it's possible that you're just overlooking the queen in your hive because she just isn't what your eyes like trying to look for, and she's just a lot darker. And then the next thing is you want to spend just 5 seconds looking for her. You pull out a frame, you look at that side of the frame and count to five. Turn the frame over, count to five. You don't want to spend too much time looking for her on one side while she's on the other side hiding under things. And you do this for every frame. And even then, and also like when you're pulling the frame out, also look in the hive to the frames on either side because I have seen the queen just jump off the frame while pulling it out. And so she's on the frame next to it in the hive. Um, and then after you spent 5 seconds on each side of the frame, then you can spend a little bit more time looking for her. And it has to be like your top priority when you first open the hive. So don't like, try to look for brood and look for eggs and look for this and that and then be like, okay, yeah, now I'm also going to look for the queen. It should be like as soon as you pull the frame out, that's the first thing you look for, and then you can look at the rest of the stuff. But some queens don't care that they're outside the hive, that the sunlight is on them, and some really don't like it. So it sounds like you just have a skittish queen, and you're just going to have to make it like a top priority when opening a hive to try to find her. And eventually you should, especially as the hive gets smaller. As summer's ending, the hive's going to get a lot smaller. The population is going to go down, and so it'll be a lot easier than it was, a month ago. I have that queen spotting video that kind of lists all those things in there. It's on YouTube and in the beekeeping class. Might be a couple of extra tips in there that I'm forgetting, but that's the big one. That's the one that my boss had told me when I first started working there, was to spend no more than 5 seconds looking for the queen. And because they go and requeen every year, so you go out there and you open up 100 beehives in a yard, and you need to requeen every single one of those hives and then get back in a truck and go to another yard and then drive an hour and a half back to the farm. So you need to be really fast, and that's what they do. Pamela says, but when you do crush and strain, you have no drawn comb for next year, so you sacrifice your drawn out comb. That is correct. Yeah, and but you really shouldn't be doing that to a lot of frames. Crush and strain method is good for when you just have like a frame or two of honey. And if you have frames that are older, the comb is older, it's for the best, I think, that those frames don't get reused too many times. So I would go with some of the darker, older frames to do the crush and strain method with than some of the newer ones. And you can always melt that down for candles and body products and stuff. Um, Nix says, I also think it helps to use your peripheral vision more than trying to see the queen directly. Her movement usually triggers me first. Yeah, Then sometimes works for people. They're not. You're supposed to look at the frame in thirds, not look at each individual bee. She moves a lot slower than the other bees and a little bit different um, than than the worker bees. Michael Huntington says, "I've never heard you drill down into why you use empty frames. Can you touch on that?" Um, well, the reason why I started using, um, sorry, my husband just called me twice while starting this live session. But he's also at a car dealership looking at a truck. So I don't, he possibly needs me to, I don't know, do something, come get him. I don't know. So the reason why I started not using foundation was because I was working for a farm and I wanted my own bees. And they said, like, I didn't want to just do things the way that they were telling me to do things. I wanted to try it with my own hives. And they said that they keep getting calls because it was a bee farm with, a couple thousand hives, but then they were also a honey packing company and they sold honey all over the world. And she said that she was getting a lot of calls for comb honey, but that the beekeepers didn't want to do comb honey. So I started off not using foundation so that I could do comb honey. And also, uh, it just didn't really seem necessary. Uh, I got frames from people that had foundation built into them. They were plastic and they were older and they kept cracking because, plastic doesn't last very long in those humid climates. And it was just a mess. My hive tool kept going in through the frame when I would try to pry it out of the box. So I started to just throw those old plastic frames out with the foundation built into them, and I just put just plain old wooden frames in, and it seemed to work okay. And that's how I did comb honey because that was the easiest for me. It was the cheapest. It was really the only way I could make a decent amount of money off of it because otherwise you use those Ross rounds and those other comb honey boxes, you're paying so much money for their packaging, you're not making really like anything off of the sale of this honey when you add in the cost. And then, of course, in Hawaii, everything costs a lot to ship. So I built my own boxes, lid, bottom board. I bought a box. At the time, Man Lake was selling a box of 100 wooden frames on Amazon, unassembled, for $100. So it was just $1 a frame. And that was the only thing I was buying. You don't get paid very well as a beekeeper in Hawaii, but the cost of living is insanely high. So I just wanted to do things as cheaply as possible. And that's what worked best for comb honey. And then I just started to realize that like I just didn't need foundation in the brood boxes either. And the more I read into it, people were doing small cell foundation to help keep varroa mites down. I talked to Michael Bush, and he said that he does not use foundation, and that it's like some people theorize that the all of the chemicals and stuff, that the pesticides that is coming in with the pollen and the nectar and the treatments you use, all that stuff gets absorbed in the beeswax. Beeswax is very porous and it can start to just sit in there, and it can be harmful to the bees to have all this stuff in this comb that's just like been sitting in your hive for years sometimes. um I also just personally like seeing all the different sizes in the cells. I've used foundation in the frames on the beehives I kept at the hotel that I kept bees for, because they had an extractor. And uh it was okay, but whenever I would put frames without foundation in the box along with frames with foundation, the bees built comb on the frames without foundation first every single time. It was never even like sometimes. This is like one of the few things that bees like always preferred an empty frame to do what they wanted to in over a frame with foundation. Um, so it's one of those things that I personally prefer, but I know that most people, it's not the way that they do things. So I don't really like to push it on people. And it's not something I necessarily teach in the beekeeping course because I think that it's a little bit too different from the majority of the US beekeepers to really try to push it on people. But it's worked really well for me, and so I'm don't really see the point in changing it. Um, Philip says in the same boat, had my hive since spring and haven't seen the queen. Yeah, it's really common. It's really common to have trouble not seeing your queen. Um, Really, if like you've never seen a queen, if you've never seen a queen bee, then sometimes it really just takes someone pointing it out to you. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then it's a lot easier for you to see one in your hive. So if you've never seen a queen bee or you only saw one once in a beekeeping class you took like 2 years ago, then what might be best is that you take another in-person beekeeping class or see if there is somebody nearby that will let you shadow them so that you can just get a little bit a few more queen spotting experience under your belt, or see if they want to come to your hive. But usually it's easier if you're just like, can I just come to your bees and just stand there and watch you while you do your thing, and then it might be a little bit easier for you. Have this cough. It's just a never ending cough that will never go away. Okay, well, it is almost 5 o'clock. So if anyone else has any questions, put them in the comments. I will put in there that company that makes that heater for your hives in wintertime if anyone is interested in looking into it. Hopefully, I'll be able to try it next year. We're still on the hunt to find a property here in Pennsylvania. As of right now, we are still looking at Pennsylvania, but who knows if that's going to change, depending on how hard it is to find something that is in our budget. It's very hard to buy a house when so many of these homes are, it says that like the people bought them in 2018 for half the price of what they're looking to sell them. And I don't know where everybody's moving to in Pennsylvania that they think that they're going to sell their house high, and I don't know where they're going. um I did it's very I just don't really know. We sold our house high too, so we were expecting to spend more than what we would have normally would have because we at least have that profit from our home, but we did not sell it. We just didn't feel comfortable listing it for too high. Uh, it's we didn't want to, you know. I had a little bit of an issue with being one more person that's just making it hard for someone to buy a home. But now it's hard for us to buy a home. We're going to stick in there for a little, to stay in there for a little bit longer because we mostly moved here so that my kids could be near family and I could be near family. Um it's nice to see my parents more than once every 2 years. I like them a lot. They're really nice people, and I really want them to be a part of our life and be a part of theirs again. So we'll see. I You're looking in every single county that is surrounding Philadelphia at the moment. Um, but my husband is not happy that there are not very many lakes in this area. He's, and this is New Hampshire, I suppose. So, if you are in the class and you have questions, you are more than welcome to email me. It usually takes 1 to 3 business days for me to respond. If it is an emergency, put it in the subject line or just send me a second email so that I see it and I can get back to you a little bit sooner. Um, it's always funny to meet with a realtor or our realtor's on vacation. So he's having other realtors show us houses. And there's like just this point. And I'm like, I don't think I can put bees in this yard. I don't think people will like me if I have bees in this yard. And then you have to like explain like what exactly you need in a yard when you're looking to put beehives back there. And it's I don't know if any of you guys have had neighbor issues with your bees, but I've heard a lot of terrible stories. And I just don't want to deal with that. I've had some issues putting bees on other people's property and them dealing with their neighbors, and this was farmland. So I can't imagine what it would be like if I had like a 1.5 acre property and bees on it. But on the plus side, there are some beautiful farmhouses out here in Bucks County and Delaware County. Well, not Delaware County, really. Chester County along the Delaware River. We have seen some really gorgeous places. Like really, like some of them a little bit too nice. I just don't even want my children living in that house. They would destroy it. It was like built in 1790, and the one property, the deed was given to the guy from William Penn himself in 17 whatever. um, which I take to mean will be very cold and drafty in the wintertime. One person says, I was just offered an orchard to place hives. Do you usually just give them honey as payment? Payment? Yeah, I do. If they need, so like in Hawaii, nobody really needs pollination. The coffee and the mac nuts like might do the mac nuts do better with bees pollinating them, but they don't need bees for pollination. People don't pay for pollination out there, and so I always just found people that were it was really I found that it was like really important to find people that
Mario Kart on here.
oh yeah that wanted to help the bees and wanted to help a beekeeper, and they were happy with honey as payment. The one guy, I tried to give him like 2 jars of honey and he gave one back to me. It was like, no, 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 no. 1 jar a year is more than enough. And I was like, well, give it to like a friend or somebody. He's like, no, they don't need it. Okay. Um, Other people, like one person had a wild hive and some very odd structure and on their property, and I removed the hive from this. I don't really know what it was, like a horse trough that was elevated very high but had a large cardboard box inside it. I don't anyway, when we were there removing it, then they mentioned that like they would want that like, if I was ever looking for a place to put bees, they would be open to it. And it was really close to another place that I had a yard that did really well. But while I was also there, the guy like asking if I could give him some of the honey from the removal, even though I didn't charge them for the removal. So the fact that he's also asking for honey when I'm doing this service for free. And then he asked if I could. He was leaving for Alaska that day or the next day and wanted to know if I could go get some of my honey and bring it to him. And I was like, you want me to drive home and get some honey and bring it to you? He's like, yeah, because I'm leaving and I'd like to bring some honey to friends. And I was like, go to the grocery store and go buy some honey. I just I just removed this hive from your backyard and it took me like 3 or 4 hours to do. And I'm like covered in honey and I would like to sit and take a shower. I'm not driving home to go get you a jar of honey. Um, and so I put bees on the property, and it was just kind of an annoyance. I said 7 hives, but at first I only put 3, and then when I went to go put the next 4, then he came out yelling at me that he didn't say it was okay if I put more, and it's just um then they changed the lock on the gate and he wanted me to call him every time I was coming up so that he could open the gate for me because he didn't want to give me the code for the gate. So people that are okay with honey as a payment are probably going to be the best people to just deal with. Even if you think it's worth it to pay for a yard because it's going to be a really great yard. Um, and then, like, there's nothing to stop them. I mean, you can sign a contract, but that doesn't always stop people from wanting more. Uh, So I don't recommend paying people to put bees on their property unless like you have a really good reason for wanting bees there. Linda says, can you recommend a good place to buy bottles for storing honey? Mason jars are too deep. Mason jars are too deep. Well, I mean, I don't like to store honey in mason jars because the lids start to get this really weird stuff all over them. I don't Probably not here, but in Hawaii, they would start to like rust or something, and there'd be this weird black gunky stuff all over it. Um, I just always kept my honey in a 5 gallon bucket, even if it was a tiny little bit, and had a bucket warmer, which is just like a giant heating pad that's made for liquefying honey. And it was really easy to then just be able to liquefy it and pour it into jars as needed. But what I did was there was a friend of mine was making mead and selling it, and I asked him where he got his bottles from, and he told me about a place called Sustainable Island Products here in Hawaii, and they were just a place that everyone went to, like the local restaurants and stuff, for compostable takeout containers. But you could also order glass jars in bulk, and you could order as many as just like a few cases. And they had a bunch of different glass jars to choose from, and they would order them and have them shipped over and then distribute them to everybody. So I mean, if you don't like mason jars, then the other option is to go online and have some jars shipped to you from whatever wholesale place, or find other people that have a jar that you like that are selling them, like, that are selling their jams or something in them, and ask them where they're getting them, because you might be able to buy some from them, like a small amount, or figure out what kind of wholesale place is selling them locally. Having glass jars shipped to you is always a little risky, even if you're not in Hawaii. Um, all right. Well, thanks for everyone for logging in and commenting. It's nice to hear from you guys. And if you have questions, you can always email them to me. I will do a live chat for everybody on the first Friday of the month in September, which is, I don't know, next week, I guess, maybe. And hopefully back to the regular schedule. If you have recommendations for things you'd like to see videos about right now, let me know. It's kind of, like a not busy beekeeping time of year. Uh, and my equipment and everything is still in a pod on its way across the country. So I'm running low on things that are helpful for people to hear about that don't require live bees. Um, and see you next time. Have a good Labor Day weekend. Took my kids to Sesame Place today. Uh, that was a lot. I will probably be avoiding large crowds for a good week after that. Bye.